And just recently, so a couple nights ago, with my wife, me and her were just talking about one of her projects, and we are talking about like kind of building out like a project that she's that we're going to be working on like over the next few months. And I found myself kind of in that same space and being like, the conversation that we had like last year that really helped inform me kind of like what I'm looking
Mm.
at down on the paper. So I'm like,
Yeah,
we're
that's so
looking
good.
at this we're looking at this project, and a lot of times we go into these projects and we're just like, let's just go and do it. And then like I think one of the problems with that kind of mentality is that it's like what is the saying? Like, how do you eat an elephant like one
Yeah,
bite at a time?
yeah,
And so it's like, yeah, like we're just trying to like take everything in, but what we ended up doing is kind of sectioning things off, saying, okay, we have these assets that we're going to be pushing towards this project, and what does this need? What does this
yeah.
need? And kind of creating these small worlds in
Mm-hmm.
association with our project. And I think that when we did that, when we actually like did that, like, and we were very strategic about it, we found that really everything that we needed for the project that we could do for the project, like we had. You know what I mean? And I think there's a lot to that. There's a lot to like even something like let's say like renting this room.
Yeah,
Like renting this room might seem like, oh man, like it's way out there for you. Like, and which is like I'm not like depending on your situation and
right.
things like that. But like being able to like rent like a space like this might be like really, really out of reach, or it might feel like it's out of reach to you. But if you really sit down, like a lot of people, if you really sat down, you budgeted, you thought about like, okay, well, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Like where do I want this idea to be 5 years from now? If I want this idea to be this big 5 years from now, then at some point I'm gonna have to make some greater version of the
Mm.
investment that I'm making right now. If I'm gonna be, if I want to be an athlete, then like okay, man, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that sucks because I like my sleep. I like to like sleep in.
Right.
But if I'm young, if I'm like man, I'm like really in a space where I'm really trying to get to the big leagues, then right now is the time to wake up early,
Mm-hmm.
go get a couple hundred shots off before I go to school. Right now is the time to like like try to get onto a team. And I think that there's those moments really every day in life. Like really
Right.
every day you should be assessing like okay, are there things that I can cut? Are there things that I can live without right now that way I can really put my all into like this venture or like wherever else I'm doing, because whatever money that is going into like renting this space could have easily just been like, oh man, but I want to like I don't know, I want new rims for my car. I want like
Yeah.
this. Like there's like all kinds of other things that you
Yeah.
could have like convinced yourself that like oh this is like more important. But it's really cool to see being like okay well there's this started out like we're doing this podcast in Jeff's house, and then there's like a thought like man like if but there's going to be a separate I know we even talked about this I think tracking way back to like our first couple podcasts where like there's this idea of this individual completely separate poetry
Right.
space. And I'm like yeah, but I think a lot of times we're thinking the first incarnation of our dream is supposed to be whatever the biggest version of it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? And this goes for stuff like YouTube. This goes for stuff like filmmaking. This goes for stuff like this. It's like very seldomly is somebody's like first movie gonna be like 20 million views on YouTube and this huge rocket ship of success. A lot of times it's going to be you're making a whole bunch of movie, or
Right.
most of the times, actually 99.999% of the times you're making a whole bunch. You have a huge amount of output, and then there's one bit that because of the fact that you're in rhythm, that one takes off, and then other things take off, and then other things take off. Same thing with kind of like with like a space like this, right? It's like yeah, like you have the idea for what is going to be a much larger version of this, but the first version is not going to be the larger version. This is going to be like a thing that it's beautiful for what it is, but and you appreciate it for what it is, but you also have to utilize it so you can elevate.
Mm.
So yeah.
I like that word version because it's also like, think about what you're doing now and think about what if what you're doing now is version one. So then you can kind of ask yourself, what does version two look like? Because sometimes
Mm.
we do a thing and we kind of just like it, that's just it. But
Yeah.
then I think if you ask yourself, what does version two of this look like? Well, then you start allowing yourself to expand
Yeah. Yeah.
and retake it. It's interesting some of the things you mentioned too. So, for instance, one of the reasons I got the space was we had our retreat recently. So we have a
Yeah.
retreat
I
that
keep
I'm
wanting to.
trying to. I know, just press the table. Because normally we would soundboard with some sound effects. And so traditionally the retreat's been once a year, although I'm trying to look into upping that to 2 or 3 times a year, if not four. And to rent a retreat space, you're looking at look because our retreat's intense time wise. It's basically like a 9 to 5 commitment, 3 days a week. So to find a venue that can fit that, some
Yeah.
venues are charging $100 an hour. If you have connections and people are willing to work with you, you're still probably looking at places I'm typically looking at are charging like $100 a day.
Yeah.
Versus, so for this space, basically the way it happened was uh, Tim, who owns the space, basically said, "Hey, we have this conference room. This is what the rate would be per month." And I was just thinking, like, okay, well, I can rent a space for a weekend that costs what this costs for a month. And it's like, well, imagine what all the things I could do for a month. So it's almost like there is sticker shock at first, right? Because it's like, man, this is expensive. But then it's like, well, long term, it's actually really cheap.
Yeah. Okay, so and this is probably I don't want to say blow everybody's mind, but it blew my mind when I thought about like what investment looks like whenever you hear something like that and what it reveals about yourself as like an entrepreneur or like an artist. Because if I think a lot of times you have to really reflect like somebody tells you, okay, well it's gonna be like I'm gonna throw a number out. So let's say in order to run a retreat it's going to be $500 like for the entire that's the operating cost. That's how much it's going to cost for you to like run this retreat. And then you're man that sounds like maybe it's a lot. And then but you're willing to do it because you can see the beginning and the end of the retreat.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're like, well, I can see this, I can see this, I see what I'm getting out of it. Okay, bet. But if somebody tells you like, okay, well, like, but to rent the space for a month, it's going to be $400. A lot of times you're like, man, like that's $400. Like that's a lot. But then it's like the only reason why you feel that feeling is because you are envisioning the stopping point every time. You're always thinking about like, well, once I'm done with it, what am I gonna do? But I'm like, okay, well, hold on. Are you gonna be done with it? Aren't you thinking about having programming here all the time? Aren't you thinking about like, okay, like you really want to build this thing out and what else could you do with, the rest of the time during the month and then the next
Yeah.
month and then the next month and then the next month. And so it's really I think the word commitment is really kind of like bred in there because it's like now you're not just thinking about like, okay, what am I doing during this square window of time?
Right.
It's like now it's like there's a space somewhere down the street that if on days, on weeks, if I can't go weeks without using it because I'm I'm invested. I can't just be like, oh well, man, let me just like let it sit there for a little bit. Like, no, you're invested. So that's also a motivator for you to be like, well, hold on, what can I do with this thing? What can I do with that space? It's almost like um, I think when I got my first camera, my first DSLR, it was like it was a big investment. It was also like, okay, so I don't want to go a couple weeks, a couple months, like without using it, without planning and
Yeah.
shoot. Even if I'm doing like product photography, like do it like I used to like pull like ketchup bottles and ketchup and mustard and like pair them and like do little product shoots and stuff like that, just so I could be practicing, just so I could be utilizing it because I was thinking even beyond. I'm like, this is my first really nice camera, but I'm like, this is not the nicest camera I can have. And this is not the end of where I think my camera like acquisitions like will be. And I'm eventually gonna get this one and this one and this one.
Yeah.
And so the thought of being like, well, using it is part of my experience. And once you really understand that, like once you wrap your head around that and like are committed to that, well then now it's like, yeah, renting a space like this, it's like, yeah, like, when you're in the poetry show, like in your, like we had Karen, you did Karen Scott's here a couple yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, literally yesterday.
Time is linear, guys, for sure. I promise it. But yeah, we had Karen Scott's here yesterday, but then we're doing the podcast here today, and like you have things all throughout the week. And I'm like, yeah, like it's really pushing you to be like, well, I have to use it because I have to use it.
Yeah.
Like I have it.
Yeah. There's I got it from Christo, and I don't know where he pulled it from, but the idea that, when you spend money, you're basically like each dollar is a vote for the world that you want to see.
Yeah.
And there's also the idea that, one difference between people and how they handle money is, if you save money to spend it, that's different than if you use money to create something that generates more income for you. Like, just in terms of like layers of wealth, like, so for instance, by renting for this space, all the access for future opportunity that it gives me,
Yeah.
versus if I approach it as, if I rent the space, I'm out $400. Well, it's like, no, like, it's not that if you rent a space, you're out $400. It's if you rent the space for $400, what are all the things that's then going to bring in for you?